After we have completed the scope of deliverables in our mandatory assignment number 1, using the specification structure, it's time to move on to the scope of work. So we're going from scope of deliverables to scope of work. So work is what you have to do to complete the deliverables. And of course, work will consist of many activities. And remember this, an activity contains a verb. But in a project with high uncertainty, how can you find all you have to do early on in the project? Well, that's almost impossible. So we talk about two different kinds of project planning. One is called situation-oriented, the other is called activity-oriented. Let's take a look at the difference between the two. In the situation-oriented planning, we first find what we call milestones, and then we call activities. So is that the best way to go? Find milestones first and then activities? Or should we find the activities first and then the milestones? Well, it all depends on how much you don't know. And what you don't know in a project is the project uncertainty. So if you have a project with high uncertainty, well, then maybe milestone planning would be better, or situation-oriented planning would be better. So let's talk about an activity first. What is an activity? That's a limited piece of work that can be planned and executed by one person or maybe a small group, often called a work package. And in your case, when you have a small project group, it's natural that each work package will be handled by one person. That's how we divide the work between us. Now it's important to know that milestones will be reached and deliverables created by doing the activities. Without performing activities, well, how can we reach a milestone? The way to identify activities is normally by breaking the scope of work down into an hierarchical work structure. But sometimes we also find activities from direct brainstorming, and then maybe we can set them up in kind of a structure after we've done that. And also important to notice is that the sum of activities represents the project's scope of work, which again is different from the scope of deliverables. The scope of work is what we have to do, and preferably, except perhaps in your case, you would want to do as little as possible and have as much deliverables as possible for that small amount of work. Now, unfortunately, that's very often not the way it works out. A milestone, on the other hand, is a situation that we can verify in a project. So we're talking about situations here. We are talking about kind of a goals. Of course, a goal is a future desired situation. This is a situation that we have to pass through in a project in order to continue. Very often it is a decision point where we will select one of several alternatives. And of course, before we have done that selection and made our choice, how can we define or come up with activities? It is a situation where several activities have been completed, and that's just to emphasize what I just told you, that you always have to complete activities in order to reach milestones. And it should be described as neutral to the solution, so we should not imply any kind of solution, neither any kind of activity actually, in the milestone description. And please also start all milestones with when. Now there are good and there are bad milestones. And this is just to show you what it means with neutral solution. If we express a milestone, and this is correctly starting with a when, as when the bulldozer has demolished the house, well, that's a very bad milestone, because it's more or less a description of an activity. We can improve it by saying when the house has been demolished. That's better. But it would be even better if we just left it as when the house is gone. In that case, though, we are free to choose any kind of solution as to how to do this, and we can wait until the last moment, if we want to do that, to actually decide which activity we are going to use to remove the house. This is an example of a milestone plan, and we see the milestones here as small circles, and they each start with a when, and this is more or less a life cycle plan for a whole project. You can see the items that we have been going through as decision points in our project model. But it says here that a milestone plan is actually a structure that shows the logical and sequential dependency of situations through the project. We should only consider only important situations and decision points, not to have too many milestones, because there's a milestone planning rule that says that, for instance, you cannot get to this milestones without absolutely having been through this milestone and this milestone. So you cannot actually have a stable plan and swap milestones. And if you have too many milestones, I'm sure you cannot obey that law. And then we should also forget what you have to do. We should at this stage, because now we're talking about projects with rather high uncertainty, as in your research project, we should forget the activities. And this is an example of a more advanced milestone plan with 2 deliverable runs, as it's called, and we have a marketing series of milestones here. We have a software development series of milestones here. This is a rather advanced plan. Actually, we have dependency between the 2 milestone sections, almost like sub-projects. And up here we have a network showing the activities needed to get to milestone MR3, as well as this is a network showing how to get to milestone SW2. So sooner or later, of course, we have to find the activities needed to do to reach the milestones, but not at this very early stage. Okay, let's take a look at this example. And this is a project that actually is going to establish some kind of connection between the islands A and B. And there's, as you can see here, a sea in between here with waves and maybe sharks also. And all we know is that we need to make some kind of connection between these 2 sides, the A side and the B side. Now we could set up a milestone plan for this, because if we are at a very early stage of the project, we really don't know what kind of connection we will be making. We have to look into that. So let's start with milestone number 1 up here. And that is actually when we have decided the type of connection. Is it going to be a bridge? Is it going to be a tunnel? Is it going to be some kind of virtual connection? Or is it just going to be a ferry? Well, we don't know yet. So that should be the first milestones. And of course, the activities we can plan are the activities that could be planned to reach this particular milestone. Then we could set up a second milestone, and that is after we have decided what kind of connection. We don't know yet if it's going to be a bridge or if it's going to be a tunnel, but we can see into the future that when we reach M2, then we have made that decision in M1, and now it remains to decide actually where are the connection points going to be, because the connection points would depend on what kind of connection we would have, whether it's a tunnel or a bridge or a ferry. And then at the end, we will decide the type of object, the type of possible tunnel, the type of possible bridge, the type of possible ferry, etc. And it's first when we reach this point that we actually can start planning a concrete bridge building or tunnel building project. While up to here, for instance, here we could plan the activities needed to be done to reach this milestone, and when we reached that milestone we could plan the activities needed to be done to reach this milestone, and so on, so forth. We plan the activities that actually would be assessment of what kind of connection object, and after we have reached this milestone, then we can actually plan, let's say we decided on a bridge then. So sooner or later you have to plan the activities. And as we saw, we can plan them gradually, but if it's a very uncertain project, there is no way we can plan all the activities for the whole project. So we have activities to reach milestones, activities in a concrete project. Milestone planning in that case may not be necessary at all, because in such a project there is low uncertainty. So let's take a look at the bridge here that we perhaps decided that we would be making. And actually now we're a little bit into activity planning. We have set up a milestone, we came up with the bridge, and we want to plan the bridge, and there it's okay to use activity planning. This is what it consists of. This is the deliverables actually, the foundations, the lights, the roadway, the rail guards, which we see here, and we have decided to go for a flat pack bridge from IKEA to connect the A side and the B side. And then it's time to set up a WBS, a work breakdown structure, that we can see here, starting with the top level, which is the top level activity, building a bridge. There is a verb here in what we call the gerund form, building bridge, or we could say just build bridge. Let's break that down in a hierarchical structure, and maybe we can split it in two: building foundations and assembling the bridge. We are on a verb mode here, as you can see, with the verbs building and assembling. And when it comes to building foundations, we can break them down into casting and blasting. And when it comes to assembling the bridge, we can break them down into assembling road, move roadway, that's to actually to get it at IKEA and move it to the site, mount railguard, and mount lights. And actually these figures here are our estimated times, durations for the activities in days. And we can break the this side of the structure down one more level and say cast A, cast B, blast A, blast B, with the duration as somebody has come up with in numbers in the brackets. Okay? These are work packages. Work packages are the activities at the lowest level in the structure. So we decided upon 8 work packages, and we are then talking about complementary work packages. There can be different individuals that will be responsible, or rather there should be different individuals that would be responsible for planning and also executing, in that case maybe with some others to help, these different activities. Complementary tasks. We continue on to actually planning the schedule, and we will be using the 8 activities and we'll be setting them up in a network. And this is what the network, the logical network or the activity network, is going to look like. And based on that we can find the critical path, which is the longest path through the network. We see that we get to this point after 6 days, because this line is taking the longest time here, and then we add 2 more days to get to this junction point. So we're at 8 days here, and this is 10 days, and we'll be here after 9 days. So we have identified the critical path as this one, this one, this one, and this one. Any delay on one of these 4 activities will delay the project. While these activities would have a slack, for instance, this one could have a, we can move this one 3 days, so it has a slack of 3 days. Now you won't be needing this one in your project for the time being, but you might need it later when you get to more detailed planning. So what I'm going to show you now is how to prepare your project for tracking by making a milestone chart. That is your initial plan, which you will be using to follow up your project as it goes along. And there you should have the milestones, which actually are the stable parts of your plan. So you can change activities later, but the milestones will be fixed. So let's take a look at this very genius way to set up a project plan that is so useful for following it up and tracking your project. Okay, this is actually strange metrics. Sorry for the Norwegian here. It should of course be week instead of uke, but you should know as much Norwegian now that you know that uke means Norwegian. Means week. So this axis is the actual time, and these are planning times. So we may have different plans and different follow-up meetings in these different weeks, while this is actually absolute time. So we set up the first plan for the project, and we say that, okay, we'll have milestone 1 reached in week 35, and 2 in 37, and 3 in 40, and 4 in 41. So we start with the project, work with the activities that have been planned, and then we meet after a few weeks in 35, 2 weeks later, and then we see how it went. And we realize that we still haven't reached milestone number 1, so we schedule it for next week, or schedule it as it's called in English, while schedule is American. And we hope for the best for the remaining 3 milestones. And we also draw the lines here, and as soon as we have a skewing line like this, we realize that this is being delayed. So that's the situation in week 35. We continue on to week 39, and we color black those milestones that we have reached. And we see that this milestone was reached as planned, and this was reached a week later, and we plan for the next 2 milestones. Now we're a little bit more realistic or pessimistic maybe. We see that there's a tendency for delay, so we draw the lines again. We continue 2 more weeks. By now we have reached also the 3rd milestone, and it seems that we are so optimistic that we'll say, okay, we'll reach this one later on, as planned week 43. And we draw the lines, and this is the last week. Now the project has been completed, and the only further delay was that this milestone was delayed another week, and that is the milestone chart. This gives you some good historic background, and it also gives you a basis for seeing how the project is going. Now let's take a look at the other dimension. Of course, this is time, but what about cost and resources, which are linked to activities? So we set up another matrix or table up here, and this perhaps would in your case be your man hours that you plan for depending on activities that's needed to reach the different milestones. So you set up a budget, and maybe you can have a high certainty for this part of the project, the first milestone, but of course the uncertainty is higher for the remaining part. You may not have planned all the activities. So these are budgeted costs or man hours in your case. So this is what you have to actually do for your project in assignment number 1. You have to set up this baseline man-hour plan, and you have to set up this, and you have to set up this one, and of course the rest we'll take later into your project. And I can also tell you what happens when you reach the different milestones. Maybe you reach this milestone, as we saw here, the week after 36, and we spent 500 man hours to get here. So in order to compare, we have to move this one over here. So this would be the actual costs. We move them over here, make a blue line, and the blue line will be the comparable actual cost, which is time compressed relative to the black ones. So just for comparison, we do that. That's a great invention, the milestone chart, and this is what you will be working on also in mandatory assignment number 2. Also, make a note of what it says about triple estimates, because I will be going into the statistical basis and how you can actually work very advanced in planning with triple estimates. But for any activity that you are planning, which of course will be the basis for the man hours that you're using, think in terms of the optimistic number of hours, let's say 50, and then the pessimistic, maybe it's 200, and then you find what's more realistic, and maybe it's 75. And then you take the average between these two in your plan, and that is 225 divided by 3. That would make a more realistic man-hour plan. So it's going to be very exciting to see how your triple estimates come out. Of course, in activities that you know very little about, the distance between optimistic and pessimistic will be large. But this can be treated statistically, and we'll be working on that later in mandatory assignment number 2. I'll be discussing the techniques with you in the lectures later on. And then I wish all you EPS students good luck with mandatory assignment number 1 in project management.